Support for Conversations Live comes from the members of WPSU and from the Gertrude J. Sant Endowment, the Cindy and Helen S. Friedman Endowment, and the James H. Olay Family Endowment.
Good evening and welcome to WPSU's Conversations Live, Vaping and the Opioid Crisis. I'm Ann Danahy. Reports on e-cigarettes and vaping are frequently in the headlines, including news about long-term lung injuries. But what is vaping exactly? Can e-cigarettes be safer than smoking traditional ones? How can families and schools help prevent young people from picking up a habit that can become an addiction? And do the risks of e-cigarettes and vaping have anything in common with another recent epidemic, opioids? Joining us to talk about all of this and answer your questions are two experts. Jonathan Folds is a professor of public health sciences and psychiatry at Penn State College of Medicine. Folds has done extensive research on tobacco and e-cigarettes. He spent his career finding ways to help smokers beat their addiction, and he continues to teach and research smoking cessation. Melissa Tomascik is a prevention specialist with Penn State Extension and the Bennett Pierce Prevention Research Center in Penn State's College of Health and Human Development. As a prevention coordinator with the Prosper Project, Tomascik implements evidence-based focused on substance use prevention and building strong families and communities. We also encourage you to join tonight's conversation. Our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242, or you can email us. You can also join the discussion on Twitter at WPSU using the hashtag WPSU Conversations. Jonathan Folds and Melissa Tomascik, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have a lot of questions for you, but before we get to those, let's bring you to speed with e-cigarettes. How did we get here and where do things stand? While the percentage of Americans who smoke traditional cigarettes continues to go down, the number of young people vaping or using e-cigarettes is going up. In 2019, more than 1 in 4 high school students reported using e-cigarettes in the past 30 days. One big reason, flavors. Some companies have been offering varieties like strawberry kiwi, espresso, and peach gummies. And many vaping devices are small and easy to hide. At the same time, some smokers say switching to e-cigarettes helped them quit traditional cigarettes. So far, more than 2,700 people have been hospitalized from lung injury associated with e-cigarettes or vaping. 60 deaths have been confirmed according to the Centers for Disease Control. While that number peaked in September 2019, according to the CDC, reports have not stopped. The CDC says most of those cases are linked to e-cigarettes containing THC. The federal government is taking some steps to curb e-cigarettes. The legal age for smoking went up to 21, and under recent changes, there are limits on flavors for some e-cigarettes. So that gives us a little bit of background information, but Jonathan, I wondered if you could just expand on that. In particular, I'm thinking about e-cigarettes and vaping, and a lot of the times those terms just get kind of thrown around or used interchangeably. But tell us specifically, when we're talking about it, what do we mean by e-cigarettes versus vaping?
That's a great question. So when we're talking about e-cigarettes, typically we're talking about nicotine electronic cigarettes. When we're talking about vaping, it's not clear what the substance is. And I think it's really important that when we talk about these things, we're clear. Because sometimes when people talk about vaping, they're talking about vaping other substances than nicotine, like THC, for example. THC is the active psychoactive drug in marijuana. And that's the thing that's been associated with these serious lung illnesses, not nicotine e-cigarettes. So there could be anything in it, frankly, but when you buy an e-cig, you're typically buying a nicotine electronic cigarette.
Okay, so we want to maybe use caution with just saying vaping and talking about what type of vaping specifically are we referring to?
Yes.
And I imagine, Melissa, that a lot of times when you're working with young people and families, people aren't necessarily making those distinctions. They're talking about e-cigarettes, they're talking about vaping. How much of a concern is this, and what types of questions and concerns are you hearing from parents?
It's a huge concern. So often we hear with both youth and parents that everyone's doing it, so-and-so got caught. And there's a lot of mixed messages going around, and it's great to have Jonathan here today to kind of help us, disorient which is which. But when we talk with parents, mostly about vaping or alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, it's really, we want parents to think about expectations and limits and values that they have, and really to verbalize those with their kids, because it is really important, because we can't assume that our kids know exactly what our expectations are of those things. So we want to have that conversation, that open and honest conversation, so they know the limits and the expectations with those things, and honestly consequences as well if they start doing those things. So, and also a huge thing is we want parents to be good, positive role models too for their kids.
So technically the legal age for smoking e-cigarettes or even traditional cigarettes is 21, but it sounds like you want to start talking about that with your kids before that. Start laying out those expectations.
Yeah, because kids are getting, their hands on all sorts of things these days. We're not exactly sure how, but we want them to be prepared, even if they're experiencing peer pressure or it's, caught off guard, that they're prepared to say no.
And one of the big concerns with e-cigarettes and vaping is not just becoming a little bit sick or just getting a cough like you might from an old-fashioned cigarette, but becoming seriously ill. I think there have been about 2,700 documented cases of people ending up in the hospital from these related injuries. And then we've actually seen 60 deaths in the United States. Jonathan, can you talk a little bit more about that? And you mentioned THC, that's the compound in marijuana. Is believed that that's what is behind the problems that are actually putting people in the hospital?
Yes. So they've now narrowed it down even further, and what we believe is happening is that basically THC is the drug in marijuana, and in most states, including Pennsylvania, it's illegal unless it's prescribed by a doctor. But many people have been using it. It used to be, when I was young, people would talk about smoking a joint. Now they talk about having a THC vape. And so because it's illegal, they're basically sold by drug dealers, okay? And the drug dealers figured out that if they added some other chemicals, they could make more money. And it seems that some of them added a chemical called vitamin E acetate. It sounds harmless, sounds like it's got the word vitamin in it, but it turned out that this chemical, when added to the liquid with THC, it actually, when it's put into a vape, is very harmful to the lungs. And so we noticed that almost all the people who were getting this serious illness were people who used THC vapes, whereas it's much more common to use nicotine e-cigarettes, and yet those didn't seem to cause it. And now that they've narrowed it down to vitamin E acetate, they haven't found a single electronic cigarette with nicotine in it that contains that chemicals, but they found a lot of THC vapes that do, and they're still on the street. So the key thing is not to take any vape product from any informal source, a friend, a dealer, or anybody that you don't know, because they could contain that very harmful chemical.
Do they know what it is yet? Have researchers found what it is about that chemical that's causing the problems?
No, I don't think they've really figured it out. I think it is a chemical that's in some other products, like skin lotions. So there's a big difference between something that you just put on your skin, but something that you put in a device that heats it to a very high temperature, may turn it into another chemical, and then it inhales into your lungs. So I think the key message, and this goes for almost all substances, I think, as Melissa will testify, that if you don't know for sure what's in it, don't put it into your body. And that's the case with THC vapes, because they're illegal.
Right. Is that something that you have been working on, other people have been working on, trying to get that message out to teens that, no, you don't want to smoke regular e-cigarettes or vape regular e-cigarettes, but when you're doing something that you don't even know what's in it, you're taking even more risks.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just really focus on trying not to do anything that's not normal to put into your body, because we don't know where it would go. We don't know what kind of gateway drug that would be. And, the earlier you start, that's, it's even harder to quit, or you might lead to other things and derail your life from what you're supposed to be doing as a young child.
And we're going to get a question from a Penn State student, but before we do that, we'll remind our listeners that you can call us to ask a question too. If you're just joining us, I'm Ann Danahy, and this is Conversations Live, Vaping and the Opioid Crisis on WPSU TV and online at wpsu.org/live. Joining us tonight are Penn State experts Jonathan Folds and Melissa Tomascik. Our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242, and they're ready to take your calls. You can also send us questions by email at connect@wpsu.org. So while we're waiting to see if we get any calls from our viewers out there, we did get a question ahead of time from a Penn State student. And what Megan Hartman wants to know, we have her asking this question, and we will put it to Jonathan, but first we'll listen to this question from Megan.
I just don't understand the appeal, so I would just want to know like what draws people in and what makes them want to do it. Like, is there some like chemical inside of it, or like is it the flavoring? Like, I'm just curious.
And so, Jonathan, that's almost a two-part question. First, what draws people in? Why do some people get addicted? And then why are some people able to do it and then move on, and some people do end up addicted?
Yeah. So I think the reason why people try e-cigarettes, it varies between two different populations. You've got long-term cigarette smokers who've been addicted to cigarettes. Everybody knows that that's going to kill you, causes lung cancer and all the diseases we know about. And they look at e-cigarettes as a much less harmful way of getting off of cigarettes. They're continuing to take the nicotine, but with far fewer chemicals. And then we've got young people who are starting to try things and think of an e-cig as the new thing, and the flavors are attractive as well. Sometimes understanding of the reality of what they're vaping, you sometimes hear people say it's just water vapor and flavour. In reality, a nicotine e-cigarette obviously contains nicotine, which is an addictive drug. It contains propylene glycol, it contains vegetable glycerin, and it usually contains a few other chemicals, stabilizers and flavorants and things like that. So although it is less harmful than a cigarette, maybe a dozen chemicals, a cigarette smoke, it gives you about 7,000 chemicals. Not good for you. So, I mean, a clear message is if you're not a smoker trying to quit, there's no reason to start using an electronic cigarette.
Don't go down that road. Is there research about why, even with traditional old-fashioned cigarettes, or even now with e-cigarettes, why some people are able to pick it up and put it down?
Well, some people find the reinforcing effects of nicotine more pleasant and reinforcing than others. I mean, I'm not a smoker. And I think it was partly because I was lucky. As a kid, I did try a couple of cigarettes. It made me feel sick. I had asthma. It made me cough. And I just thought, this is not for me. But we're all wired a little bit different. And some people like the drug effect. But as we've heard very often, and many of the parents who are listening would recognize this, some people just try it because it's different. They're not planning to continue to use it. They like the idea of the flavour, hey, that tastes good. But they're not thinking, hey, this is an addictive drug I'm messing with here. I could try it for fun and end up doing it for years.
And Melissa, when you're working with schools and you're training other people to work with students and teachers, how do you handle that subject that, hey, if you're talking to kids, this is something you could become addicted to?
Yeah, from the field of prevention, when we start working with new groups of young people, we really focus on the positive and try and build those youth life skills. So when they have an opportunity, they'll say no. We focus on future goals and dreams and hopes that they have for themselves currently and in the future, like thinking about academics and being good in sports or extracurricular activities, family and friends. So we focus on that first. And then after, we get to the nitty-gritty and talking about vaping, alcohol, tobacco. And then we just say, those things could keep you away from reaching your hopes and dreams. Because these kids are young that we're working with, and it's all about preventing something that before it started, so they haven't started anything yet. So we're trying to keep them on path with, achieving some really good things in their life.
And we actually have a graphic, and it's looking at some of the reasons that teens report for vaping. And the number one reason is experimentation. So that's something that we're talking about. So they're experimenting, and maybe they don't know what they're getting into. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. There's a lot of kids that are very curious to what everybody's talking about, what everybody's doing, what they say, but that's not necessarily true. Everyone isn't trying. And that's a really important fact that we want to be able to express to kids, like not everyone is doing it, and you could choose to not do that. And we just say, you know, it's maybe not even worth the chance of experimenting and using, just because you never know what path that one might lead to. And, you know, you might get something bad as well, where it could have serious consequences.
Right, even if the number of people in their grade is using it, I think it was more than 25% for in high school, that's still not the majority by any stretch. So trying to get that message across to them. Well, we talked a little bit about e-cigarettes and vaping and differentiating between it, but it might also be helpful, Jonathan, you brought actually some examples to kind of show us what we're talking about, because it has come a long way for people who are just still used to old-fashioned cigarettes when thinking about vaping or smoking.
It has come a long way. So I'm going to show you.
And I don't mean that in a positive way, but yeah.
I'm going to show you how they've changed. So this is the way they started out. They started out looking like a cigarette. And when you puff on it, the end would light up. These were the things you could buy in a gas station or a corner store. We now know that these didn't really deliver a whole lot of nicotine. They had nicotine in them, but they weren't very efficient. The battery size is quite small. But then people progressed onto this kind of e-cigarette. You can see it's larger. This part is the battery. It has a button. Now, whereas this was breath activated, meaning when you take the puff, that's what activates the electricity to heat the coil to produce the vapor. These ones, what we believe is that the battery was not strong enough to get the nicotine into the vapor, and that's why they didn't deliver much nicotine. This is different, more powerful battery, has a button, and you can press the button to heat the coil a couple of seconds before you take the puff. So we believe that this kind is when it really took off, because this was able to get the nicotine more effectively into the vapor. The other characteristic of these is they have this little part here that you don't have to buy the pre-filled cartridges, you can buy a larger bottle of liquid and refill, and that makes them a little bit less expensive, because with the other one you're having to buy new cartridges, and they're quite expensive. And this is the latest kind of device, and it has a little pod. You call this a pod, so we tend to refer to these as pod mods. They look a bit like a flash drive.
Right.
So parents might look at this and think, oh, that's your flash drive with your data stick from school. So the pod is separate. That's what contains the liquid with the nicotine in it. And sometimes some of these, they have a part at the end that you can stick into your computer, and that's what recharges it. And so this is the thing that has become popular, particularly with young people, because they can stealth vape more easily. You can hold it in your hand, you can puff, and nobody really notices. Some of them have some advantages from the manufacturer's point of view, that they have a temperature control circuit so they don't overheat the liquid, and it means they don't produce quite as much vapor, which means it's easier to do it without other people noticing.
Okay.
So for various reasons, we think young people have been particularly attracted to that style, because you could hide it more easily.
Right, it does look like something you could just hide and disguise, and a lot of schools, a lot of families are facing that problem. We were talking about experimentation as being one of the reasons that kids want to do this. When you have something like that, it almost seems like it could seem like oh, this is like a fun trick, look what I'm getting away with. That's something that is a challenge for parents and teachers to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we hear it all the time that, you know, kids are concealing it, and even doing it in class, in the bathrooms. And, you know, there's so many are confiscated in school. And so, I mean, it is a real concern that it's so available.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that as more young people and adults realize that, okay, if you get addicted to this, this is the road that it's going to lead down, that might be a way to curb the number who are picking up the habit?
Yes, I think so. I think people have been scared about when they've heard about this EVALI epidemic. And although that wasn't caused by...
And that's the lung injury from
injury.
e-cigarettes and vaping.
Yes.
Right.
I think it stands for electronic cigarette and vaping associated lung illness. And so that has made people realize that even though we now know that was caused by a chemical in THC vapes, not nicotine electronic cigarettes, it makes us all realize that, well, when you put something in your body and you don't know what it is, you really don't know what the consequences are going to be. So that's kind of woken people up a bit to it. But I still think that some people might, as they do with cigarettes, think, I'm young, I'll quit later. You know, I'll start using this and think, you know, I'll quit when I go to college, or I'll quit when I graduate from college. But when you get addicted, it's not that easy. I mean, some of these things, I mean, this style of e-cig, that we published a paper from a study we just did in November, and just today a new study was out that completely replicated our results, which found that these can deliver as much nicotine as a cigarette. So that makes them as addictive as a cigarette. And that means that, you know, say a 15-year-old young girl who tries it now, gets hooked on it, 10 years from now, maybe having a family. But the nicotine, even though nicotine is less harmful than the other chemicals, we know it's harmful to the unborn fetus, for example. So there's an example of how much sooner than you might be thinking, you could be addicted, and it could cause real harm to health.
So you don't want to just dismiss it and say, well, it's not as addictive or it's not as harmful as smoking a traditional cigarette, that there's are those long-term consequences down the road.
Certainly not harmless.
Right, right. Well, there are new regulations that are being rolled out. The age was raised to 21, which seems like it could be a positive thing. Yep. And there's also limits on the types of e-cigarettes, but aren't they still able to get some flavors and different types of e-cigarettes? Those are still be available?
Yes. So the new rules are a little bit complicated. So the one that's clear is you can no longer sell any nicotine product, tobacco product, or e-cigarette to anybody aged under 21. So that, if that is enforced, that will make a big difference. And so we really hope the FDA and local authorities really enforce that seriously. But the new laws about flavors are that you can no longer sell devices that either have a cartridge, like the one here, it's a screw-on, or a pod-like device that contains any flavor other than tobacco flavor or menthol flavor, a bit like cigarettes. So all the other fancy flavors you can no longer get with these devices. Well, when I say you can no longer get, let's be clear, you can no longer legally sell them other than in a vape shop. And in a vape shop, they typically sell larger devices that have a tank system, and you buy the liquid separately and you pour it in. And generally the idea is that the belief that vape shops are not going to be serving to young people, and so that's a safer way to keep the attraction of the flavors away from young people. That's the idea.
That's the idea, but I imagine that there's still concerns that even if the age is 21 and there's these extra limitations, that kids are going to find a way to do that. Yep. Is that something that you're still hearing from parents?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a real concern. And we want to, you know, in Prosper, when we talk about prevention, we really start talking about these things with kids that are in 5th and 6th grade. That's really when we start to talk about prevention. And because it is really important, because we want them to know the risks before they have the opportunity, because they're transitioning from elementary to middle school, and there's a lot of different changes, whether it be a different school, more friends, bigger classrooms, cafeteria, lockers, that sort of things. And they're developing, getting more mature too, and wanting more freedom and independence. We want to make sure that they have everything that they need to say no to this stuff, because we don't know what kind of gateway that would be. You know what I mean? They're so newer, 2015, did you say? Yeah. That we don't really know what kind of gateway they are yet.
Yep. Right. Yeah. Are there things that parents should or shouldn't do when it comes to talking about that with a teenager? I'm thinking, okay, you know, the scare tactics, or is it just trying to have an open ear, like, okay, I'm here to listen to you? Are there?
Yeah. Well, when we talk to parents, as kids are maturing, going from elementary to middle school to high school, it's so important to stay connected, stay interested, stay involved in their kids' life. Because when you have that bonding and they see a real interest in their academics and sports, extracurricular activities, friends, who their parents' friends are, you have a great relationship. You could form a great relationship where you could have those conversations, open, honestly, stay calm, and talk about these things, you know, and, you know, not have to search through things.
Right.
to find, if they're doing things.
Laying the groundwork so that you can
Yes.
be
I've
there.
done that.
Yeah.
You can be there to answer
Yeah.
those questions. Well, we actually do have a question, and we got this question from Sarah. And Sarah writes, what kinds of consequences would you recommend that parents give if they find out their high school student is vaping?
Well, there's so many different parenting strategies that are out there. Ones that we have used are really because we want the kids not to start it, right? So you could find out who their friends are, make sure their friends are good influences. We use the old tactic of who, where, when, and how you're getting there. Where are you going? When are you going to be back? That sort of thing. And then also you could have, what kind of consequences. The best kind of parenting is to have appropriate consequences. Not to be too harsh, not to be too wimpy, somewhere right in the middle. Because when you have appropriate consequences, kids feel responsible, safe, and when they have those expectations and accountability, it leads to success. So you want to be able to have appropriate consequences. Maybe take some privileges away, give some like other consequences. You don't ground for months anymore because that doesn't work, because parents, we don't want them to have to be police officers either,
Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot, but a couple of examples of consequences that might be middle of the road that might be appropriate.
Well, you don't want to take away really good pro-social things like sports, and whether it be like 4-H, things like that. Maybe it might be something like going to a dance or not being able to go out with your friends, or maybe when your friends come over, they have to be at your house where they're supervised. They might not be able to have as much freedom. Think about those things that are really hard when you're.
Phone?
Yeah, the cell phone, that's a great one. And iPads, that's a really good one too.
But if you take away the cell phone, it's like you're ruining my life, Dad.
Yes, definitely.
Maybe save that one for when you really need
Because,
it.
that is a really good one, but it also becomes complicated when they are like at a sports or an extracurricular activity and you want to be in touch with them.
Right.
So yeah, maybe
tricky.
when they get home, take it away.
And we did get a couple of questions, and this might be a good time to go to a question that we got from John Hanauer, and he's retired and lives in Huntington. And we got this question from John. He wants to know, having the age 21 is probably a good idea, but you're not going to stop young people. If they want it, they're going to get it. I mean, they're going to get it regardless, but to discourage people from legally getting it, 21, that might be a good idea. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think he's right. It is a good idea because it will make it harder to get the things, vaping, whatever. But nobody's pretending that it's a cure-all. We know that people will find a way to get their hands on things, but it will make it harder. And so it'll be harder to become addicted if you can't easily get it. And it allows a bit more time for young people to gain a bit of maturity before they have to make that choice. But the key idea behind that law was actually because, in the United States, a lot of seniors are 18. And so what was happening was you had seniors going to high school, other kids saying, hey, can you get me stuff? And almost forcing them to be like the dealer for the high school. They may not have intended that, but they're the only ones that can do it. And they can supply the whole of the high school. So it's not really that we thought, a 20-year-old can't make that choice. It was really to take it out of high schools completely.
And the Prosper programs, Melissa, you work with a lot of those start at that middle school age when they're making that transition, right, from elementary to middle school. And it seems like, right, that's what's happening. You've got a lot of older kids around you who might be introducing new ideas. Is that kind of part of why it's so important to start at that age?
Absolutely. It's really important to get them before. A lot of them haven't even experienced peer pressure yet, or even the ideas of what all these things are. So when you build those skills up to, when we teach them peer pressure resistance skills and even identifying and coping with stress, they're less likely to be able to try it. A lot of times when they are introduced to these things, they're not expecting it. So research shows the more you practice getting out of a situation, you're more likely to, which is pretty cool.
Okay, so actually some training practice things
Yes.
to say when you're stuck in that
Yes.
difficult situation.
Yes. And it could be, alcohol, tobacco, vaping. It could be things for like stealing or, spray painting or something like that too. It could be other antisocial behaviors.
So one of the big issues, obviously, that's been in the news and on the concern in Pennsylvania and across the country is opioids. And opioids is an addictive substance. Nicotine is addictive too. And not that they're the same thing, but I just wondered, since you talk about taking kind of the big picture approach with Prosper, do you use the same approach, whether we're talking about alcohol or nicotine or opioids? Is it the same?
Yes, you know, this opioid epidemic has been like absolutely devastating to so many families. However, when you think about it, you know, in the future, it might be something else. In the past, we had different concerns. So we really focus on prevention and how that could be so important with no matter what it is, no matter what kind of substance is out there. I like to think of prevention as kind of like a public health model, because we know thinking about heart disease, we know the risk factors, we know the protective factors. This is the same kind of concept with substance use prevention in youth. We know that decreasing risk factors such as antisocial behaviors, risky peer groups, not achieving academically, not being involved in any extracurricular activities is a real risk. And also increasing protective factors, doing well in school, being involved in school, having positive peer groups is really important. And we know doing those things is going to change, the future and have these kids have a healthier future and hopefully, stop the opioid epidemic and anything else that could be happening.
Right.
At least lessen it, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And we have a question from Richard in Center Hall, and we have this by email. And Richard writes, what systemically do you think can change or be reformed in terms of laws to prevent kids from starting vaping? For example, do we need better regulations on vaping advertisement? So that's the million-dollar question. How do you stop them from doing? That's part of what, Melissa, you've been talking about with Jonathan. Do you have any thoughts on that too? We've raised the age. There's other restrictions on the flavors.
Yes. So the products and the advertising is partly regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And one of the things that we've learned is that the advertising isn't like the old-fashioned advertising. It's not like out there Joe Camel and that kind of thing. And it's much more sophisticated using social media. And sometimes it's, now we have in social media, I'm told, I'm not a social media guru, but I'm told that you have young people who have thousands or millions of followers, and they're called social influencers. And so nowadays, rather than just paid ads for products, things can go viral by just giving these products to the social influencers and sometimes paying them to have them on their blog and that kind of thing. Harder to control, but FDA and the regulators have to get to grips with that. This is the modern world, and we think that's how some of these new electronic cigarettes actually became so popular. The company hired other companies to market them, and they did it in that quite kind of clever and almost insidious way. They got young people. When I say young people, they weren't hiring 15-year-olds to do it. They were hiring maybe 19, 20-year-olds, but the kind of people that teenagers aspire to be like, and that's how it took off. So I think FDA and the regulators have to get to grips with that.
So there's the actual regulations and rules and restrictions, but then there's kind of more of the social influence too, of trying to find a way to offset that or even go the other direction, have positive influence on young people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's tricky. I hope that answers your question. And if you're just joining us, I'm Ann Danahy, and this is Conversations Live, Vaping and the Opioid Crisis on WPSU TV and online at wpsu.org/live. Joining us tonight are Penn State experts Jonathan Folds and Melissa Tomascik. Our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242, and our panel is ready to take your calls. You can also send us questions by email at connect@wpsu.org. So also another e-cigarette question. For people who are smoking traditional cigarettes, is that a viable way to quit traditional cigarettes by going to e-cigarettes? We're not recommending people pick them up if they haven't started it or done that before, obviously. But what do you tell people when you get that question?
Yeah, and it's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Because they're not a pharmaceutical product, there haven't been the same number of clinical trials to find out if they're safe and effective in the same way that we have for medicines. So we have products that can help people to quit. nicotine gum, patch, inhaler, so the nicotine replacement products. And we have 2 medicines, bupropion and varenicline, that are FDA approved for smoking cessation. They work. So it's not like vaping is the only thing, but now we have a few studies in other countries, none in this country, but one particular big study was just published last year in the UK, where they randomized smokers to try and quit with support and counselling with either nicotine replacement or e-cigs. And a year later, the e-cigs had done almost twice the success rate as the nicotine replacement. So that was the trial that really made us think, wow, these things can help smokers to quit. It's not the first choice because we haven't got the same strength of evidence, but these preliminary studies actually do demonstrate that they can be helpful.
And I imagine it's also a concern too, because it's not the same as just quitting outright. You're still smoking an e-cigarette. You're still running the risks of that.
Yeah. Well, we don't talk about smoking in e-cig.
Inhaling, vaping, and
right. So there's no smoke involved, but we do feel it's quite a big step in the right direction. You know, to get a smoker who's going to continue to, who's addicted, who's tried the patch and the gum and those things, and feels that this is the only thing they think can help them. If they try it and they succeed, that's a big step in the right direction. We don't want to encourage people to do it forever. We want them, once they're off the cigarettes, to think about how they're going to come off the e-cig. But the evidence from that and one other trial in the UK is quite encouraging.
And we talked about this a little bit a while ago, but there aren't the same risks of people ending up hospitalized if they use the regulated traditional e-cigarette.
Well, if they use nicotine e-cigarettes, we don't see that at all. So there isn't a single case of vitamin E acetate, that harmful chemical, contained in a nicotine electronic cigarette. And there's many other reasons why we're fairly confident that epidemic was not caused by nicotine e-cigarettes. For example, nicotine e-cigarettes are sold all around the world, but this epidemic only happened in the United States. In fact, it started in Wisconsin, of all places, and then it spread to Illinois. And we think that just at the peak of this epidemic, this might, I suspect, and I don't know for sure, but there was a massive drugs bust in Wisconsin right next to the border with Illinois, and they found like $90,000 in cash and thousands of THC vapes in this drugs bust. And it's not been proven yet because it hasn't gone to trial, but it seems to me rather a coincidence that that's where the epidemic started. And it doesn't seem to be nicotine e-cigs because they're being used all over the world without this problem.
Okay. Well, we have another question, and this one is from Katie Barrett, a Penn State student.
I really would like to know why there's not more research on the vaping of marijuana, especially in the wax form, because I've heard a lot of issues like a lot of the outbreaks that were in the news recently were from those, but it's been more linked to juuling, and I would really like to know why they're not studying it, because they're not hard to find.
Is that true? There's not a lot of research on this?
It's totally true. And part of the reason is that THC products and marijuana is still illegal at the federal level. And so you can't get federal dollars to study, like in a clinical trial format, most of these products. And so compared with the number of people that are using them, particularly now that they're becoming legal in many states, the amount of research on it, she's right, it's far less than you would expect. And I personally have concerns about it. I have concerns. We're talking about legalizing in Pennsylvania right now.
Right, so medical marijuana is legal in Pennsylvania, but recreational is not. Right?
Recreational is not.
It's still illegal at the federal level.
Yes, but what you find is that people who like to use marijuana or THC vapes, they don't want to get into trouble and test positive in their workplace, so they get prescribed and they have a card. So if they ever test positive in the urine, they've got their card. But it's much more expensive to get the prescribed high quality, probably relatively safe medicinal one. It's much cheaper to get the illegal recreational ones. And that's what we tend to find. And I'm concerned that that's the pattern that's going to spread across the United States, that people will, I think it's good that people can get the benefits of the prescribed medical marijuana, but they will know that that's relatively expensive and you have to jump more hoops to get it, and they'll end up using the illegal stuff.
And so they might end up using illegal marijuana. Right, I mean, that was a big concern. We were talking a little bit a while ago about the opioid epidemic, and there were some people who were prescribed prescription opioids for pain relief for whatever reason, and then for a number of reasons they may have become addicted to that and end up using it on the black market. So it sounds like you're raising a similar concern that people might be using something, using the legal version, but for a number of reasons end up going a different route.
Yes, I mean, I think that was one of the main ways that the opioid epidemic began. Pharmaceutical companies were telling doctors that this is non-addictive, this can help your patient. You know, nowadays when you go to see your family doctor, amongst the things that you get asked is, could you rate your pain? Mm-hmm. Most of the times I say, I don't know, I didn't come here for pain, but it's become one of the vital signs, and that's partly the influence of the pharma companies, so that if you say you've got some pain, the doctor will then prescribe something for it. Now we know that that was disastrous. And many of the people who have opioid problems, they got it from a legal prescription. I think that's changed a lot now. We've educated the health professions, and now there's a public education campaign to educate the public that, you know, if you get prescribed opioids, it's not something to be messing about with. This could end up in an addiction, and I think it's widely known, but it's still a problem.
Right. We actually have a call now, and we got this call from Abbie in Lebanon. Hi, Abbie. Thanks for calling. And what is your question or comment?
Hi, I'm calling tonight because as a former smoker, I now use an e-cigarette, and I'm wondering, I became a smoker myself, well before I was of the legal age. And I know that young people are using the vapor, and I'm wondering if cigarette smoking is declining among the youth that are vaping, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Okay, so I think regular traditional cigarettes, that is declining, right? Is that correct? Yeah.
Yep. So in fact, amongst high school kids and amongst 18 to 24-year-olds, cigarette smoking is at the lowest rate now than it's ever been. In fact, in the last 5 years, since e-cigs became very widely used, then cigarette smoking has plummeted. So it does seem as though the e-cigs are starting to substitute. So that's an excellent point by the caller. So my concern is that while we have to regulate it and we have to keep it out of the hands of teenagers, clearly, for all the reasons that Melissa's talked about, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because the long-term hope, in my mind, is that e-cigarettes actually completely replace cigarettes, right? So that the companies that are now selling cigarettes, they are kind of either required or they make the decision they're going to get out of the cigarette business. They're going to get out of the lung cancer business and actually continue to have a business by selling a product that's much less harmful.
So, Melissa, is that something that you noticed in schools and talking with parents and the teachers who work with the students, that cigarette use, the traditional cigarettes, actually went down?
Yes, absolutely. We were excited because it was going down, and not very many kids were smoking, not as many kids were smoking. And then the vaping came, and then it's kind of been that as well. So we're kind of trying to navigate the vaping and being well informed of kind of what that is and who's doing it and at what ages, along with, all the other substances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one concern about that is there is some evidence that teenagers who try e-cigarettes are also more likely to later smoke a cigarette. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be contradictory, because at the same time as the smoking rates are coming down, more people are vaping, and yet the people who vape, it seems to be a risk factor for smoking. So we're trying to tease out in the research, what does that mean? And we think that what it is that the kind of people who were likely to try cigarettes are the same ones who are likely to try e-cigarettes. And so it's not a surprise that if they try an e-cig on, on point A, that a year later they might have tried a cigarette. But it is a risk. That's part of the reason why we're concerned about these really high rates. I mean, 27% is really high for high school kids. And
Remember who've had an e-cigarette in the past month, I think.
Yes,
right? Yeah.
exactly. So what we're really starting to focus on, how many of these kids become regular e-cigarette users, meaning they're getting addicted, and how many of them go on and become a smoker. And that would be a disaster. In fact, that's a little bit of a concern about this age change. So you've got kids, let's say an 18-year-old, who may have become addicted to e-cigs, and now they can't get the flavours, and now they can't get legally access to any of these things until they're 21. What are they going to do? The hope is that they quit, right? That'd be the best thing.
Sure.
But another alternative is that they don't buy legal e-cigarettes because they can't legally buy them.
They turn to the black
They
market.
turn to the black market.
Yeah, that's something that you might have to address when you're working with kids and you're training other people who do that as through the Prosper Prevention initiatives. How do you approach that topic? How do you try to get to the kids to make them understand, like, no, it's not easy to not have an e-cigarette if that's something you were doing, but you can't turn to the black market. You don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a lot of it is very new for me to hear this new information, which is really great. And I would love to be able to take this back to our Prosper communities to try and educate them about this as well. And with prevention, it's we have studies, or there have been studies, that the more you could delay the initiation of alcohol, the less likely you are to have a substance misuse disorder. And because a lot of parents, when we see parents and we interact with parents, they're like, oh, they're going to do it anyway. What's the big deal? But it's so important. But that's not the case. We want them to delay any use experimentation as long as possible with really any substances. They say that a child tasting alcohol less than the age of 15 is 4 times greater to have a substance use disorder rather than waiting till the age of 21. So that's huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really interesting because you can see, like, okay, well, what's the harm? They had a beer, but it's really just taking that idea of just trying to push it off as long as possible.
As long as possible,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And I'm not involved with the Prosper Project at all. It's mainly organised out of State College, but I want to give it a plug because when I saw the data from some of their long-term studies, it's incredible. I mean, because the project doesn't focus on any particular substance or drug, and yet I focus on the smoking data. So I look at the smoking data. I mean, wow, this intervention in young kids, when they're 21, they're still significantly less likely to smoke, and that's an amazing effect for a relatively brief intervention in young people. And I actually would like to encourage them to actually, when they do their long-term follow-ups, to look and see if I suspect it will probably reduce the chances of people vaping in adulthood, even though when those interventions took place, e-cigarettes didn't exist. Because the whole thing is really to get people to focus on the positive aspects of their lives and not seek mood management from chemicals. That's the common denominator there. And it seems to have this generalizable effect across substances, even probably substances that weren't in existence when the intervention took place. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, because we're talking about e-cigarettes right now. We've been talking about opioids in the past. There are always going to be issues and challenges. So it sounds like, not targeting one specific drug or issue, but having the big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you knowing all that. That's fantastic. But it's like, that's what we really, toot our horn with, is that with Prosper, we go into communities, we mobilize communities to implement the highest quality programs, which are evidence-based programs. They've been proven to work. So we know that we're not wasting time, money, and energy. So in some of the results that we've had, we've delayed initiation or use with every substance that you could see: alcohol, tobacco, meth, marijuana, even prescription drugs. We weren't following that during the original study, and school districts actually told us about that, saying, well, you might want to add that to your survey back in like 2002, saying because we're seeing this happening within our school district. And that is one of the most significant results we have now, is that we have a serious reduction in adults that are like 25. So just having these universal evidence-based programs in 5th, 6th, and 7th grade is sending them on a completely different trajectory.
Right, and just a little bit more about Prosper for people know what we're talking about. So it is research-based, and it's these actual like in-person initiatives in different school districts across the state. So you might have a after-school program for parents and kids, and you might have an in-school program for kids. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So in counties across Pennsylvania, we have Penn State Extension offices. So we have an extension educator leading these Prosper teams in these counties. And people who are on the Prosper teams are agencies that have the same vision and mission: drug and alcohol, children and youth, YMC, faith-based. We also have parents and youth. And all of these people work together to implement, plan, we evaluate, and find funding to keep these programs going. We started in 2001, and we still have these programs going. I work with in Luzerne County with a school district that we're coming up to our 1,000th family that have gone through the program. And we know that, it's having like a tipping effect, because like, let's say you went through the program and I did not, but we hang out. I'm benefiting because you're watching your kids, you're instilling some strategies, and I'm learning from you. So that's like, that community effect is what is like really unique and that is good.
Reaching that critical mass. We did get a call, and we have this one, and it's from Louanne in Johnsonburg. Hi, Louanne. What can we help you with?
Hi. I was just commenting that I thought the culture has changed. I've been homesick the last couple days, and I watched some old movies on TCM, and I noticed that everyone's smoking in these old movies. The doctor is smoking in the hospital, and it's just perfectly acceptable, and that's the way things were in the 40s and 50s. Now we're trying to go the other direction, but I don't think we're quite doing it as well as we should be doing. I work with preschoolers, and I think smoking is an even bigger problem now than it was 20 years ago.
Well, thanks, Louanne. That's a really interesting observation, right? We've all seen those old movies and even TV shows, and everybody's like just puffing in places that now you would never see that. But she's also raising the concern that maybe it's coming back again, and I don't know if that is related to e-cigarettes.
Well, the data doesn't suggest that. I think because it's so unusual and it's not so normal, when we see a young person smoking, well, we really notice. We think, wow, what's that young girl doing with that cigarette in their hands? But when we hear people saying what our caller said, it is worth taking note, because we still haven't had many years of follow-up since the vaping increase took place. And it could be that this fear that we have that it's going to lead to more smoking, it could happen. But when you look at the data that we've got so far, it suggests the opposite, in fact. And it suggests that people are actually smoking less. And we hope that that's going to continue. But we have to be really wary. We hope that the 21 law is going to make a difference as well. And we hope that, to your point about role models, we hope that if more adult smokers, more parents who smoke, can successfully quit, whether they use an e-cig or whether they use counselling or whether they go cold turkey. I'd like to make a plug for in Pennsylvania, we have a quit line. So it's 1-800-QUIT-NOW, and that's free. And when you call that, you get free counselling, and you can get free nicotine patches.
We're just out of time, so that's a perfect way to end it. So one takeaway for people might be to call the helpline. What is that again? Yeah, it's 1-800-QUIT-NOW. So if you're a smoker, call that. If you've not smoked, don't start vaping. And Melissa, what would you hope someone takes away from tonight, a parent or someone who works with kids?
Parenting with love and limits, and keeping an eye and keeping connected as your kids mature. And for communities and agencies out there, invest in evidence-based programs. the best way to go.
So focus on the evidence base,
Yes.
and if you're thinking about quitting smoking, try to get help doing it.
Yeah,
To give the number a call or find whichever way you can do it.
absolutely.
Well, thank you both so much for coming in to talk with us. It's been really informative and great to get your perspectives on this.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for joining us on WPSU's Conversations Live. Now we're asking you to help us pick the next topic for the next episode. Do you want to discuss healthy aging, marijuana legalization and cannabis products, or climate change? Cast your vote today by going to wpsu.org/conversationslive. And now stay tuned for the premiere of Part 4 of Battling Opioids, a project of Pennsylvania's public media.